During the 2020 campaign, we had Joe Biden hiding out in his basement. Biden knew his best game plan was to ride the wave of pandemic panic, using it to oust Donald Trump, a strategy that proved successful. Now, in 2024, Kamala Harris was pulling straight from Biden's playbook, dodging interviews, ghosting press conferences, and keeping voters in the dark. No one knows what she stands for or even who she is. But guess what? With just weeks left, Kamala finally decides to show up in a media blitz. Better late than never, right? Sky News Digital Originals presents Kamala's Media Mirage. Vice President Kamala Harris is suddenly everywhere. She's popped up across multiple TV networks and podcasts after remaining mostly hidden since she took over as a Democratic candidate. Her hiding hadn't gone unnoticed, even from inside her own camp, with Politico reporting. Democratic operatives, including some of Kamala Harris's own staffers, are growing increasingly concerned about her relatively light campaign schedule, which has her holding fewer events than Donald Trump and avoiding unscripted interactions with voters and the press almost entirely. Well, now Harris has embarked on a media tour, appearing on Stephen Colbert, Howard Stern and The View in a matter of days.
28 days to go until election. So we are thrilled that joining us right now for her very first talk show appearance and live TV interview appearance since accepting the Democratic presidential nomination. Please welcome back the next president of the United States.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
What you've taken on is extraordinarily difficult. And I mean, do you feel the pressure of the moment in the sense that, like when I met you out in the hall, I said, I'm really nervous because I want this to go well for you. I want it to go well for the country. Even when I watch them on Saturday Night Live with the where they have Maya Rudolph playing you, I hate it. I don't want you being made fun of. There's too much at stake. I believe the entire future of this country right now. I mean, as America, land of the free, home of the brave, I think it's literally on the line.
I agree with you.
One of the old saws is they just want somebody they can have a beer with. So would you like to have a beer with me so I can tell people what that's like? Okay. This was. Now, we asked ahead of time because I can't just be giving a drink to the Vice President of the United States without asking. You asked for Miller High Life. You asked for Miller High Life. I'm just curious.
Okay, the last time I had beer was at a baseball game with Doug.
Okay, so cheers.
Okay, cheers.
There you go. Ooh. That tastes like the beautiful city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Champagne and beers.
There you go.
You can see the pattern. They're all Kamala fans. Harris is intentionally selecting platforms that offer soft interviews where she won't be challenged on key issues.
Clearly, there's been some bad news in the internal polling. And while today there was a New York Times Siena poll that showed her 3 points up in the national vote over Donald Trump, that's only anecdotal. What she needs to do is get up above him by some significant margin in the swing states, and it just isn't happening. And just as that New York Times Siena poll hits, another YouGov poll hit as well, saying that Trump is up. So what it tells me is that something told her in the internal polling it's not going well, and she needed a strategy shift. Otherwise, she would not be changing strategy with 30 days to go until the election. You only do that if you expect to lose. So she has seen something that we haven't seen that probably is rather dramatic, because they are taking a huge risk putting her out, and also her buddy Governor Pinocchio, who can't go 2 minutes without telling another lie. So we'll see whether it changes her numbers at all, but it's really late in the game to be making this big a shift.
she's going for a new strategy here, but the problem is when you put yourself out in the media, even with polite pushback, which I think was effective from Bill Whitaker and revealing to voters, she just doesn't have much of an answer. And it doesn't even take a lot of pushback for her to not have much of an answer, which I think is why they've been so risk averse putting her out there. On The View, she's asked, is there one thing you would do differently? She's selling herself as a change agent, and she says there is not one thing that comes to mind. That is devastating. That is a closing argument ad for Trump. And I find it sort of mystifying that it looks as if she has not been prepared or thought that she might be asked these things.
The presidential hopeful did sit down for a tougher interview with 60 Minutes, where she immediately came unstuck.
What I was asking was it a mistake to kind of allow that flood to happen in the first place?
I think the policies that we have been proposing are about fixing a problem, not promoting a problem. Okay?
But the numbers did quadruple.
And the numbers today,
watch.
because of what we have done, we have cut the flow of illegal immigration by half.
But should you have done that?
The
Should you
flow
have
of
done that?
fentanyl by half. But we need Congress to be able to act to actually fix the problem.
I mean, I give Bill Whitaker credit for at least trying on immigration, but net, he wound up the thinnest kid at fat camp. Like, it's not really a great accomplishment. That was it. That's really, he pressed her on the economy a little, and he pressed her legitimately on immigration. So good. And on every other exchange, he fell down on the job. I mean, he had questions like, you say, based on the following 3 or 4 things, that Trump is a racist. Go on. He was like, what? It was so obvious, right? And then in the 60 Minutes extra, which is the outtakes that didn't, and just some of them, not all of them, God forbid they show us the whole thing because she'd look like a drooling mess. They, of course, cleaned up her transcript. But in some of the outtakes that they posted, he does get into the coup, right? That Joe Biden went down and she was elevated and she took over this role. And I'm like, great. This is where he's going to ask her about the fact that this, A, has been utterly undemocratic, and B, resulted after she lied to us all for years about his mental acuity. What did she know? When did she know it? Why did she look us in the eye and tell us that he was absolutely fine, when we both have her on the record now and him on the record saying they made every decision together. They did every law together. She was an integral part of all of the big administration decisions. So she was with him. She was with him a lot. So she would have seen. No, it wasn't asked. He didn't touch on it. All he asked was, well, do you think that's why people feel like they don't know you? Because there wasn't a more robust process behind your elevation. Oh my, what a fail. And it was just time and time again where she started giving answers like she was at a deposition. Now, I'm a lawyer. She's a lawyer. And these answers, to me, at first sounded normal because I spent 10 years taking depositions and doing cross-examinations. And when someone says, I'm not going to answer a hypothetical, that's a totally normal, common answer in a deposition, where you're across from an adversary who hates you and is suing you or your client. This is not a deposition. It is an interview in which she is asking us, on whose behalf the questioner is there, to hire her for the most important job in the world. I won't answer a hypothetical is an absurd answer. And you know where she invoked it? Every single time it was foreign policy, because she's a know-nothing. She didn't know what to say when he asked her about China, when he asked her about Ukraine. She danced and danced and danced. She didn't know what to say when he asked her about Israel. She, like every major conflict, she seemed completely flat-footed and a little clueless, like she was waiting for someone in her special little ear pods to give her the answer. I realize this is an internet conspiracy theory, but it's kind of a fun one. And the answer didn't come, so she just went with hypothetical. I'm not going to answer a hypothetical. Well, guess what? We're entitled to the answer. She didn't give it. We used to ask that question all the time in presidential debates. Totally fair game. She didn't answer because she can't.
She's not very smart. I think that's what comes across pretty clearly. I think there's a reason why she's so popular among the white college student group of people, because she is the definition of a pseudo-intellectual, right? She kind of strings together a bunch of platitudes as if her speechwriter was formerly employed by a fortune cookie company. She puts those together, people go, oh, look how smart she is, when she's really obviously saying nothing. Look, she's not good at this, and it's incredible to me how she's so ill-prepared for the question that she knows she's going to get, right? That even among friendly media, and that's why she's not prepping, because she knows she's doing all these interviews among the friendly media, that she's not going to get pressed on those issues. Until that is, she had that 60 Minutes interviewed with the always well-coiffed Bill Buzzsaw Whitaker, who was like a dog with a T-bone steak. He wouldn't let go of her. It was phenomenal. It was something to behold. You know, she was sitting there and he asked her all the typical questions. She, of course, deflected because she has no answers, but he wouldn't let it go. It was great. When he was talking about the border, she kept deflecting and he kept going. He went back that well 3 times in the border, saying, yes, you say the numbers have gone down now, but they quadrupled under your tutelage, under your czarship from Trump. And of course she couldn't do it. He was talking about the economy. She, of course, was moving away from those questions. And he interrupted her. He kept going back to it. It was something to see. Good for him. I'm glad he did it.
Kamala Harris has repeatedly evaded the press and has managed to go 80 days as the presumptive and now official Democratic nominee for president without holding an official press conference. Yet in the midst of her recent media push, she made time for an appearance on the Call Her Daddy podcast. Host Alex Cooper didn't shy away from asking the VP the bold question we've all been wondering.
I'm curious, like, you don't do too many long-form interviews. What made you want to do Call Her Daddy today?
Well, I think you and your listeners have really got this thing right, which is one of the best ways to communicate with people is to be real, you know, and to talk about the things that people really care about. I mean, what I love about what you do is that your voice in your show is really about your listeners.
The VP has been criticised for this podcast appearance.
Isn't every show? I mean, this show's about the viewers. When you go and do a sit-down interview, at Fox News or CNN, or it's about the viewers. What does she think the media is? Oh, it's real. It's real. By which she means, I'm coming here because I know that you're not going to ask me a hard question.
Yeah, the other crazy thing she said there is she said, I love this podcast because the listeners are seen and heard. Well, actually, it's a podcast, so the listeners are not seen, and their listeners, they're not heard. But I'm just wondering what people would rather. Would you rather be seen and heard, or would you rather have the border crisis sorted and inflation come down? What's more important?
I mean, obviously she does these because she knows it's going to be a free ride. You don't see her doing any one-on-ones, hard-hitting interviews, talking about policy on even the friendly networks. She's not popping up on CNN. She's not popping up on CSNBC. Even the people who are barracking for her, the networks that are giving the Democrats a tongue bath on the hour every single day in the lead up to polling day, she's not going on there to do any hard-hitting questions because everybody knows at this point in time she's not up for it. So why on earth would you want that woman in the White House? Come on, America, restore our faith in you.
Well, the fact that Kamala Harris decided to go on that podcast at this time tells you everything you need to know about her. This is a podcast, Call Her Daddy, that specializes in lobotomized, X-rated content that I can't even reference here. It's just so X-rated. And she goes on this podcast at a time when hundreds of Americans have just died in the wake of a major hurricane in North Carolina. And we have another hurricane barreling towards Florida that's supposed to be the worst in decades that this country has seen. Meanwhile, FEMA is saying it's out of money as it has spent billions of dollars in the last few years helping illegal immigrants. Where is the leadership? This is the sitting president of the United States, and she's going on this podcast with this brain-dead host who probably can't even spell budget deficit, who won't ask her any questions about the economy or these hurricanes or anything else going on in the country. So they spend the whole time talking about abortion and so-called women's rights. It's an absolute joke.
If you're looking to persuade someone who's not going to vote for you already, then a Democratic candidate who is a rabid supporter of abortion going on the Call Her Daddy podcast is not exactly a way to persuade over the persuadable middle. You're certainly not going to win over blue-collar union workers in the Marcellus Shale of Western Pennsylvania or the auto workers in Wisconsin or Michigan. You're not going to win over those kind of folks going on the Call Her Daddy podcast. You're not going to win over the folks on the border in Arizona or the folks who are being besieged by urban crime in Atlanta and Fulton County, Georgia. These are not the people that you're going to win over. She's doing this for one reason, Rita, and one reason only, which is to talk about the abortion issue, because that is currently the only issue that a non-negligible percentage of Americans say that they care about at the polls, and that of those issues, that is the only one they say they trust Democrats more on. So she's trying to shift the terrain of this election away from the issues that we just discussed, away from the inflation, economy, immigration, and crime, which are the big four issues. She's trying to switch it away from that to abortion. That's why she's going on this podcast that you accurately described as raunchy, a podcast where I believe the episode directly before she went on literally had a sexual act in the title that I am not going to discuss on this show out of respect for the viewers there. But this is not the kind of show that someone who wants to be the leader of the free world ought to go on. I mean, it is belittling of herself, I think, to give this woman and this platform airtime, frankly. But, is she ever going to sit down for any, I mean, not a hostile interview. Is she going to sit down for a single real interview and actually answer real questions? So far, we've gotten Stephanie Ruhle on MSNBC. She still flubbed that one. And then she's given us Alex Cooper on the Call Her Daddy Sexual Act Glorification podcast. I mean, are we running for leader of the free world or trying to get on the cover of Playboy magazine? I mean, sometimes the mind just reels.
We're now in the final stages of the election campaign. The next president of the United States will be decided in a matter of weeks. Kamala Harris has had months to show the American people who she is and what she stands for, but instead she's been hiding and ducking for cover. So for Kamala Harris to be coming out now on this media blitz, for many, it's too little, too late.